What frustrates me is people think that climate change can be fixed by planting trees. This COP failed to increase the commitments by larger nations to phase down fossil fuels. It succeeded in as much as a loss and damage fund was announced. And yeah, so it is a foreign policy victory, but it's a moral victory at the end of the day. I don't call it Lahore Smog because it's technically neither. It's not a Lahore problem, it's a regional problem from Kabul to Calcutta. Every city in Pakistan has an air pollution problem. And dusra, smog is a type of air pollution. You begin to see a bit of smog in the winter, but there is air pollution throughout the year.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Box. Hello everyone, बहुत आपका welcome to another episode Out of the Box. आज we are having another conversation on climate change, climate justice. लेकिन इस दफ़ा हमारा थोड़ा फोकस है कि हम थोड़ी accountability पे बात करें. हम बात करें कि who are the people that need to be held accountable and what are some of the ways that we can do it, and at least हमें वो information हो, वो बातचीत करने की, ताकि ये conversations हम आगे लेके जा सकें. And इसके अलावा we will also be tackling कुछ जो मिस इन्फॉर्मेशन है, जो मैसेजिंग है, जो हमें इस इशू के बारे में मिलती है, जो शायद कॉम्प्लिकेटेड लगती हैं या हमें समझ नहीं आती, उसको भी ज़रा थोड़ा अनपैक करेंगे. एंड टू डू दैट वी हैव क्वाइट अ सेलिब्रिटी विद अस विच a lot of people who actually have been focusing on this issue and climate justice, climate change के बारे में they would know of him. हमारे साथ हैं अहमद राफे आलम, जो एक पाकिस्तानी environmental lawyer हैं, activist हैं. He is also a father. I first encountered him जब औरत मार्च की 2019 की कवरेज में आई इंटरव्यूड यू एंड योर डॉटर. इन एडिशन टू दैट ही समवन जिन्होंने बहुत एक्सटेंसिवली पाकिस्तान में काम किया है ऑन दीज इशूज़, एंड दिस लाइक ऑल दिस लाइक इतनी लंबी वो बायो है जो मैं अब नहीं पढ़ने वाली, वो मैं इस वीडियो की डिस्क्रिप्शन में डालूंगी. बट वट यू नीड टू नो इज़ दैट ही हैज़ एडवाइज्ड आवर गवर्नमेंट, ही हैज़ एडवाइज्ड NGOs एंड इंटरनेशनल ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस ऑन द इशूज़ ऑफ क्लाइमेट. ये पढ़ाते भी हैं LUMS में. ही ऑल्सो टीचेज environmental law, and in addition to this, one thing that is very much accredited to him is climate strike शुरू हुई थी सितंबर 2019 में, जहाँ 45 शहर थे पाकिस्तान में जहाँ से ये स्ट्राइक निकली थी, जिसने एक बहुत बड़ा मेजर रोल प्ले किया था ताकि हमारी अवेयरनेस में ये प्रॉब्लम आए. सो अहमद राफी आलम इज़ समवन जो बहुत देर से बोल रहे हैं हमें कि भाई ज़रा फोकस कर लो, पाकिस्तान में थोड़े हालात इतने अच्छे नहीं हैं. And he's here with us. Sir, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Risham, for having me.
And sir, and we have Sarosh here as well. Sarosh का second podcast है हमारे साथ, and I'm very excited for her to join our team. And अगर आपने पहला वाला podcast देख लिया तो आपको पता चल गया what an articulate and intelligent woman, young lady she is, and I'm very proud to have her in my team. जी सर, तो शुरू करते हैं. सबसे पहले एक बहुत सा बेसिक सा सवाल मैं जो आपसे पूछना चाहती हूँ कि when it comes to conversations around climate crisis, let's not even call it climate change, let's call it climate crisis in the context of Pakistan, और जो आप भी conversations करते हैं लोगों से, probably individual level पे भी करते होंगे, institutional level पे भी करते होंगे, आपके ख्याल में what is the most common thing or misconception, what is the one thing that people get wrong, which is the one thing that really frustrates you in the direction this conversation ends up going?
What frustrates me is people think that climate change can be fixed by planting trees. So to answer your question, but also it's difficult to talk about climate change in the context of Pakistan without first starting by understanding what climate change is globally. You have to understand this is the situation. We're at a civilizational sort of threshold, because at 1.1 degrees of global warming, we are experiencing, if you remember in late 2019, that terrible forest fire in Australia that raged for several months. Over 800 million animals died, and a species or two went extinct, right? Oceans are acidifying, coral reefs are bleaching. We're seeing floods everywhere. This year in Nigeria and in Spain and in Pakistan. I'll come back to that in a second. We're seeing this year unprecedented heat waves. Before the floods in Pakistan, there were heat waves, unprecedented in March. And across the world, there were heat waves in America, there were heat waves in Europe, impacted the wine. Heat waves and a drought in China impacted food production there. This is like happening this year. We're beginning to see forest fires in the Arctic Circle, and human beings have plastics in their body at 1.1 degrees centigrade. And what we're being told right now is that with the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere right now, It's enough to bake in about a 1.5 degree temperature increase by the end of this decade, which is about 8 years away. And unless drastic changes are brought about in our economic and political and social international fabric, we might see a 2 degree temperature increase by 2060. Because according to one study, just the air pollution associated with a half degree temperature increase from 1.5 to 2 degrees. You have to pump greenhouse gases in the atmosphere to get to 2 degrees. And most of those greenhouse gases come from things like transportation, automobile exhaust, and then energy sector exhausts and so on, will be air pollution. And that amount of air pollution getting released into the atmosphere corresponds to about 150 million deaths, mostly in Asian and African cities on account of air pollution. Now, 150 million is not a joke. It's 4 times the number of soldiers who died in World War I and World War II put together. And unless drastic action is taken, we might see that within 50, 60 years. There was an attribution study done by the Imperial College earlier this year during the summer, right after the floods, that found that about 70% of the intensity of the rain that fell over Pakistan this year was on account of the 1 degree temperature increase due to global warming. And that's attribution. So, this was not a natural occurrence. This was greenhouse gases historically emitted by the global north, because Pakistan's a very small overall greenhouse gas emitter, causing, as the World Bank has now calculated, close to $30 billion worth of infrastructure loss just in Pakistan. And this is where Pakistan's situation its vulnerability comes from just this. We're a poor country, and we won't be able to stand back on our feet if we keep on getting hit like this.
We don't have the resources to kind of deal with this. And thank you so much for contextualizing the entire problem, because it is a very complicated but also a very simple thing ताकि हमें idea हो जाए. And इसमें as you've mentioned, while we probably haven't contributed to a lot of what has changed the climate, we're going to be hit the hardest. So this is kind of a problem जिसके अंदर आपने मिटिगेशन की ग्लोबली चलो लोगों ने बातें करनी है, बट जो हो गया है वो तो हो गया और वो अब रिवर्स नहीं होने वाला, और उस पर फिर हमने अडेप्टेशन पे बातें करनी है. सो उसमें डू यू थिंक कि यहाँ पर व्हेन यू हैव दिस कॉन्वर्सेशंस विद पीपल हु आर इन चार्ज एसेंशियली, कि ये चीज़ें लोगों को समझ आ रही हैं? एंड like you said, कि people, the biggest misconception is कि people think कि दरख्त लगा देंगे तो climate change का issue solve हो जाएगा, right? So where is it that the pressure needs to be built the most ताकि in terms of adaptation पे तो properly काम हो सके, अगर चलो mitigation तक में नहीं भी पहुँचती अभी?
It's a good question, because climate change has become part of Pakistan's mainstream political discourse, and it didn't happen these floods. It happened about 6 or 8 years ago with the PTI leveraging the billion tree tsunami for a 2013 election and the 2018 election. The first time a green project was brought out in mainstream politics as opposed to Jangla Bus or something like this, and people voted for it. And so this year, within weeks of the floods, I read that the Prime Minister of Pakistan and, interestingly, the Chief of Army Staff were both saying, this is a man-made disaster. Pakistan doesn't emit many greenhouse gases. We need compensation for loss. And this sort of discourse of loss and damage has emerged. Yeah. If you remember the previous government, the PTI government, climate change was about the trees.
Trees, exactly.
And so, it was my great hope many years ago that environmental issues would become part of mainstream politics. And careful what you wish for, because once they do become political.
Yeah.
And so at some level I do see this current government treating the success of the COP and the announcement for a loss and damage facility as sort of look at what we've done because of the flood. We've gone out and we've gotten international recognition. We're going to sustain a flood, but it doesn't answer a whole bunch of questions in country at all. And I mean, that's a bit of politics. And so it's our job as, intelligent human beings to look past the politics and then say, then what are you going to do over here? And I have reminded people that 2 weeks before the Prime Minister and the Minister of Climate Change and the Foreign Minister went to Sharm el-Sheikh to attend the COP, all 3 of them were standing in a Thar coal field inaugurating a coal-fired power plant. So these sorts of things can't happen at the same time as well. But I hope we have time to sort of, drill down into what that means.
Yeah. No, before that, my एक point था, since you have brought up COP27 and you were also part of the delegation, I do ले आपकी वही बात है कि ये जो क्या इसका fund का भी नाम इन्होंने क्या लिखा है, fund for loss and damage, but they haven't really decided कि वो होना कितना fund है, वो देना कितने हैं, और like a lot of details.
I've also read that वो COP28 में चला गया, right? That's correct.
see, loss and damage was under the international response to increasing greenhouse gases and the threats of climate crisis was that in 1992, the United Nations hosted a conference in Rio. It's where the Rio Declaration comes from, called the Rio Summit, which is where something called the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or the UNFCCC, was signed. And that's the sort of major international legal instrument whose objective it is to stabilize greenhouse gas emissions. And so the cause of loss and damage has sort of become stronger over the last couple of years because of the failure of the UNFCCC system. And so Pakistan was elected to the chair of G77 in China.
Yes.
And our ambassador to the United Nations, Munir Akram, while steering that chairmanship, managed to get, again, alignment with G77 countries and consensus to then request the United Nations to put loss and damage onto the agenda of this COP for the first time. So that's the sort of role Pakistan was playing. And then at the COP itself, Pakistan was again chairing the G77 plus China. It was Ambassador Munir Nabil who led the team and negotiators. And along with the efforts, you have to recognize, of those small island states and the vulnerable nations and all the activists around the world who've been screaming and shouting for the last 20 years that you have been breaking your promise and you better have a fund of money ready so that we can get stuff to put ourselves back on our feet. That doesn't come with terms and conditions. It doesn't come as a loan. And it's not begging. This is your failure.
Yes.
Your failure to comply with the sort of equity and promises that was supposed to have been made under the UNFCCC. So that's the sort of origins of the fund. Now, the great thing about this Sharm el-Sheikh COP was that COP agreed that there would be a loss and damage facility and that a implementation committee would then now sit for the rest of the year to figure out the big questions about how this is going to work. Right? पैसे कहाँ से आएंगे? Because अगर पहले पैसे नहीं दिए तो अब क्यों देंगे? और अगर देंगे तो कौन देगा?
और किसको देंगे?
और कितने ज़्यादा US देगी, कितने ज़्यादा China देगी, कितने ज़्यादा these are how do you do the attribution to this, the mathematics to that are all questions that need to be settled. And at the same time, countries requesting or demanding from this facility, कौन होंगे, किस तरह लेंगे, and what transparent mechanisms will they have to ensure that money is
being
going
spent on climate finance?
That's right, because you might have seen a couple of days ago in the newspapers there was a political rally in Balochistan, and the rally was, I mean, basically the shamianas of the rally were UNHCR tents that were meant for flood refugees. Right, so you can't do this sort of stuff. You can't be inaugurating coal-fired power plants and then going and asking for loss and damage funds. So there needs to be a transparent, less developed countries need to look inwards and have a transparent framework. Because like many other developed countries, Pakistan suffers the same problems. We have problems of lack of transparency, sometimes corruption, inefficiency. And when you're asking for these funds, you better have a mechanism. You better clean your own act up at the same time.
So you talked about Pakistan chairing G77 and everything. So this is a huge foreign policy achievement in my opinion. So why was it not talked about in the corporate media sector or even on YouTube?
Indeed. You know what was spoken about for the 12 days I was at COP, and since I've been back, वो जी Prime Minister ने घड़ी, ये जी Chief Awami Staff.
So ये बात तो नहीं, इसके बारे में तो कोई बात नहीं हो. This was just on Twitter. This was just limited to Twitter.
The media, it's not just here but elsewhere, is complicit. It's complicit. It is a corporate media. They do not talk about this. And it's becoming increasingly clear to me how they operate. They just do not want to speak about this. It's just not something they want to talk about. In my mind, the drivers of the climate crisis are things like capitalism and patriarchy and colonialism and consumerism. Right? And within consumerism and capitalism and to some degree patriarchy falls the media. You're not going to have people who make money selling cars that use greenhouse fossil fuels. You're not going to have them. And they peg up the entire media industry. You're not going to have them admit their faults. It's just not going to happen. So media is very much.
So I just want to, since we're already talking about it, so the main theme of COP27 was basically the future of fossil fuels, right? And the winding down of the fossil fuel industry. Can you elaborate more upon it? Because I want people to know more about how crucial something of this sort is.
See, these COP meetings are meant to fulfill the objectives of the UNFCCC to stabilize greenhouse gases. And the major thing in that is that big countries have to commit to reducing and mitigating greenhouse gases so that we can stay within 1.5 degrees this century. So, keep 1.5 alive is the nara that we hear. And what you want as a result of these COPs are increasing commitments to phase out different types of fossil fuels. Last year in England, when COP was held in England, it was agreed that coal would be phased down. I mean, there are other types of fossil fuels, but it was agreed that coal would be phased down by 2050. This year, there was an attempt, interestingly proposed by India, to recommend the phasing down of all fossil fuels. A proposal that was then backed by nearly 80 countries. But the vote never got through.
Why?
I mean, there are other countries whose economies rest on fossil fuels, right? So they're much more content in just having coal phased out rather than all fossil fuels, right? Saudi and Qatar are the largest exporters of fossil fuels in the world, and they had a huge big pavilion and panel over there talking about the Saudi Green Fund or initiative, whatever that is. So this COP failed to increase the commitments by larger nations to phase down fossil fuels. It succeeded in as much as a loss and damage fund was announced. And so it is a foreign policy victory, but it's a moral victory at the end of the day. Because ye paise kal parso nahi aane wale.
So we were discussing this a couple of days ago. We started this conversation of how the smog in Lahore is very similar to how it was in London. Yes, the Great Smog of London in 1952, and you are well aware of it, I'm very sure, how many lives were lost, and the toxicity in the air was concerned the mayors to the point that they decided to switch to cleaner modes of transport. So now they have the tube, they have electric buses, cycling. That's how I got to know, okay, something is being done on some level, just as a starter, so to raise awareness about like sustainable options and how we can mobilize, and this could be an option for us. So do you believe that shifting to cleaner modes of transport, like it happened many years ago, so for us, do you think that this could lead to a net zero emission goal?
For sure. And the example of London and how it managed to move beyond smog is fantastic. Have you seen this TV show, what's it called, The Queen?
Actually, यही example, I was just about to say this to our audience, कि अगर आप थोड़ा बहुत confused हैं हम क्या बात कर रहे हैं, Crown का I think शायद season 2 है, जिसमें Churchill is the Prime Minister.
God's sakes. You see, if you've seen The Crown, you might be mistaken to think that the Queen and Winston Churchill were
Exactly. I doubt they weren't. But the point is that's the smog we're referring to. But please do your own research because I'm pretty sure it's not factually correct.
Let me start firstly by saying I don't call it Lahore Smog because it's technically neither. It's not a Lahore problem. It's a regional problem from Kabul to Calcutta. Every city in Pakistan has an air pollution problem. And dusra, smog is a type of air pollution. You begin to see a bit of smog in the winter. You see also haze, you see overcast pollution, you see smog. There's also photochemical smog. But there is air pollution throughout the year. आज उतनी गाड़ियाँ चल रही हैं जितनी जून में चल रही थी, उतनी इंडस्ट्री चल रही है जितनी जून में चल रही थी. So there's the same amount of air pollution being produced. So it's not a Lahore smog issue. And similarly, the London smog is very interesting because it was caused by the use of coal in London, which was an industrial city through the Industrial Revolution. It was the primary form of energy, and it was also very low quality coal. Produced a lot of sulfur, burnt a slightly different color, and because it was a low quality coal, because there wasn't the technology to burn fossil fuels completely, there was a lot of dust that would result as a result of using it. So really the question is, what happened in 1954 that changed this? And I was very lucky last year, one of these LitFest, ThinkFest things, someone from Oxford University who'd written a book about the London smog or London fog came and spoke, and I had the chance to ask her. And she explained to me that one of the things that had happened, I mean, people were getting sick all the time. One of the things that had happened is that after World War II, there was the return of soldiers who'd been fighting all over the world, including from the Commonwealth, and a migration of Commonwealth people around the world. both under the promise of a better future, and then soldiers returning, having defended their homeland, came to find the most filthy, unlivable conditions in the world, dying by the thousands. कि हम वहाँ जान बचाकर इधर तो नहीं मरने आए ना, कि हम रूसा, हिंदुस्तान, बांग्लादेश से उठ के इधर आए, यहाँ मरने तो नहीं आए. So they acted on their feet, and they voted out Winston Churchill and introduced a Labour government, and the Labour government immediately shut down. Well, I mean, they started by it was a political movement. The people rose in anger and used politics to change the direction of the country. Immediately what they did is they shut down the big coal-fired power plants, that there were 3 or 4 of them around London. They're now museums and high-end housing estates now, by the way. But they moved those coal power plants further away, causing pollution elsewhere, but reducing the pollution in London. And then introduced other things, better fuels. London's not the only city to have gone through air pollution. New York, Los Angeles, Mexico City, Beijing. There are plenty of places, Stockholm, plenty of cities that have, suffered from air pollution and that have addressed it. And in my experience, the one thing that connects all of these different efforts is the fact that the people in those cities had a shared vision of a future that was longer than the 5-year political cycle. And right now, when it comes to the air pollution in Lahore, depends on who you ask, you'll get a different answer. Someone will say, India. Someone will say crop burning. Someone will say, ye Shehbaz Sharif ki galti hai. And this sort of, someone will say it's not smog, ye jo private meters hain.
Yeah, or phir private meters ko phir lagane bhi nahi de, us pe bhi, they try to kind of keep you away from that information.
We don't have the first and most important thing, because unlike other things that the Pakistani state can do, I mean, it can lock you up, it can go for your taxes, and it can put 12-foot walls around all of the schools in Pakistan, which it did in 2014. It can do things, but to expect it to change the black and white of written policy, to use that to manifestly change the quality of the outside air, requires, first of all, accurate data and science and political will. And we have neither of the two. So unfortunately, my assessment is that not much is going to get better about the air pollution in Pakistani cities unless we meet these minimum criteria. Political will, vision, technical capacity.
So speaking of political will, because हमने बात भी की थी कि September 2019 में you did along with people in your network, in your family, climate strike जो आप लोगों ने की थी in like 45 cities, and उसके बाद से, I mean, is it safe to say that, like, has it kind of had, how was that experience for you? Let's just say that way, कि उसकी कुछ sustainability हो सकी, अगर नहीं हो सकी तो क्यों नहीं हो सकी? What are some of the issues that we are facing? अगर हम कोशिश भी करते हैं कि political will create करें around कि citizens की advocacy create करें, collective action create करें, तो मसले क्या आते हैं हमें वो करने में सबसे?
I'd like to start by saying I'm incredibly proud of what we managed to put together with Climate Strike. It was a group of people in Karachi and Lahore and Islamabad. And then the network that we had throughout Pakistan communicating. Incidentally, by the way, Climate Strike 19 copied the Aurat March model of organization. That was the Aurat March 2018 was a seminal moment in activism. It was like, holy God, you can do this! Wow!
Yeah, and it showed.
And so we leveraged that, and I at that point in my activism career, I was one of those folks who was perfectly satisfied with 20 people at Liberty Market holding a placard up. But then to see literally thousands of people in Lahore and thousands of people in Islamabad and thousands of people here, clearly this is a message that resonates. Right? Clearly, climate is of concern, even though, I don't want to be mean, a lot of people still think it's about planting trees. But there is a sense growing that climate change is something bad. And also, interestingly, by the way, the impetus behind Climate Strike 19, because we started planning in June of 19, was to raise awareness in relation to air pollution. September 19th ko jab kiya tha, I think it was the 23rd of September 2019, just a few weeks later we filed a writ petition in the High Court about the fuel quality available in Pakistan. That was the impetus for it. So yeah, there is a growing sense of awareness about it as well. But while I'm incredibly proud of what we did, and incredibly surprised at people's abilities and the fact that I know them and they're such good friends. I am still wistful about the entire process because at the end of the day, we walked from one point of the city to another point of the city with a bunch of placards. What did that mean? What does that mean? What happened? Kuch bana, kisi se mile, kuch mila, kuch nahi hua. And I think that's a lesson. You see, Aurat March is different. Aurat March is provocative. The Aurat March's existence is its success, right? The fact that it gets up people's noses is its success. It doesn't need to achieve equality. It just needs to be there, right? I am a little bit more direct action. I think climate change is beyond just sparking ideas.
Of course,
So if I were to do it again, I'd want to engage the government a little bit more. Unfortunately, what I find is when you engage government, they're like, bilkul, phir aap kar lein. And I'm like, for free? Because a lot of them, you go to the Ministry of Climate Change, they generally want to do these sorts of things. And they're like, yeah, sure, absolutely. And you're not really riling them up either.
Yeah. But problem with the government is
हाँ में हाँ मिला देते हैं, you're like, अब तसल्ली मिल गई, अब क्या करें?
अगर आप genuinely आपने कोई climate action लेना है, so you're going to put the people in power uncomfortable. You're asking them to do certain things and not do certain things that are going to make their lives more difficult.
In the context of Pakistan, you have to figure out who the bad guys are. Because Greta Thunberg says it's the fossil fuel guys, right? It's the global north, it's the big, and they're very good. But in Pakistan, the bad guys are very different because we don't consume a lot of fossil fuel. We're not a big greenhouse gas emitter. Who are our bad guys, right? Well, there are plenty. Let's take, water is something we're always scared about.
Yes, I was just going to ask you, we should pivot towards...
Pani khatam ho raha hai. Here we have to ask ourselves, all right, if we're running out of water, where the hell is it going? And according to the water policy of 2018, something close to 90% of the water in Pakistan is consumed in agriculture. It's diverted for the use of crops and for the use of by livestock. And then the rest of it, the remaining 10% is between domestic use and commercial use. Or 90% going to agriculture? Really? And what do we do in agriculture? We do wheat, we do sugar, we do cotton, and we do, what was the last thing we do? Wheat, sugar, cotton.
Rice?
And rice. So let's start with rice. We produce about 5-6 million tons of rice a year. And at the end of the day, rice is, you grow rice in submerged water. So rice is you can think of it as like tightly packaged water. Because it takes something like 2,200 liters of, 2,200 liters of water to make a kilo of rice. And we export just over half the rice we produce in Pakistan to Iran and other places, rice consuming countries. So we're taking our water and we're packaging it up and it's going somewhere else. And the same with cotton, it takes about several thousand liters of water to make we do a lot. Textiles is the backbone of the Pakistani economy. That water is also leaving the country. So when we're told that pani khatam ho raha hai, go ask the Rice Exporters Association of Pakistan, who makes billions of dollars. Go ask the ethanol people, the rice people. Those are our bad guys. Because there's plenty of water, 90% of the water. And it's insane because 45% of the labor workforce is engaged in agriculture. So we're doing half our population is working in agriculture where the water is going. And these are the people who are close to or near to the poverty line, right? So taking all of our water and keeping half of our population at the poverty line while just a few bunch of people make money out of it.
और efficiently पानी इस्तेमाल भी तो नहीं हो रहा ना. They're not like putting policies in place where they can actually even try to use it efficiently. I don't know.
No, not at all. Not there, not here.
We had someone on our podcast who mentioned to us कि जो cement industry, which is also a huge industry in Pakistan, वहाँ पर वो commercial rate से पानी use कर रहे होते हैं. They're not even paying like.
Oh no, we've got these.
Like sorry, residential rates pay कर रहे होते हैं. Sorry.
Residential rates if it's a residential area, but if you're out in like there's. Can I give brand names? Do you mind? No, I'm not going to give brand names. There's a water company that sunk a tube well in the Rachna Doab, and it extracts water and puts it into indestructible plastic bottles and sells it to us. They operate under the law. There's nothing illegal about it because our law says if you own land, you own everything natural above and below it, in like trees and any water that might be underground. So if you own land and you sink a tube well, that water is yours. Especially and that's our law until 2019 to 2020. And so, it's not just the cement plants, it's the big drinking companies. That's because our laws.
Yeah, speaking of laws, because वही बात है ना कि a lot of things are happening and people are getting away with it because कोई laws ही नहीं है to stop them. So if you talk about, essentially is climate litigation something that one can like focus on, or are being focused on, or is there anything that you are working in that area? And I think Sarosh, you have also
I
given
do.
the
It's
example
like
of-
I want you to get more into it because the Pakistan's first property development project, it was declared illegal by Lahore High Court, and you filed.
It wasn't
a
the first
petition.
Pakistan.
Riverfront, it's very technical, but you filed a petition on behalf of the farmers. Their rights were being infringed because decreased agricultural output would mean increased trade, exports, trade.
Those were observations of the court. The Ravi Urban Development Authority was established by an act of the Punjab Assembly. In 2018, I think in 2019, they passed the Ravi Urban Development Authority Act, and to set up an authority specifically to develop a riverfront real estate or riverfront city. And subsequent to that, the government notified or attempted to notify nearly 100,000 acres of land to be acquired for this project. And those acquisitions is what we challenged for a number of reasons. But the idea of having a real estate scheme on the banks of the Ravi is not new. It goes back, to my memory, to back in the early 2000s when PMLQ again held the sort of chief ministership here. And that's when files, I don't know if you remember, but this was a property boom in Pakistan in the early 2000s. And at that time, the government was interested in doing something. Unki government hil gayi because of the lawyers' movement. There was an election in 2008. And then the PMLN government was interested in developing a riverfront property. Again, lalach ki, how can we make money out of it? And so these guys, at that time, directed the Lahore Development Authority to conduct a feasibility. If we want to plan a city on the banks of the Ravi, how do we go about doing it? And the LDA engaged a multinational consultancy called Meinhardt to carry out a feasibility. And these guys returned a document to the Lahore Development Authority, which the LDA didn't like. Didn't like it enough that they blacklisted Meinhardt for failure to comply with the contract.
Even though they just did their job.
And no, they didn't pay Meinhardt as well. It was a several $100 million contract, and Meinhardt was out of a couple $100 million on account of the fact that the LDA said the job you've done is terrible.
Because they didn't agree with the results, basically.
Well, look, it's a feasibility. The feasibility said that, look, you want to have a riverfront city? All right, you need to have a river. Because the Ravi the waters of the Ravi were given to India under the Indus Water Treaty, and in 2006 or 10 the Indians completed the Theen Dam on their side, so there's no water. So aap pani kahin se lekar aaye? All right, so it's a feasibility. So the first problem is water. So what do you do? So the consultant said, well, you could do two things. You could divert water from the irrigation channels north of Lahore, put them into the riverbed, and have them flow past the city, and then take them back into the irrigation system at Baloki, which is the barrage south of Lahore on the Ravi. Or you can develop north of Lahore these big ponds that will store rainwater from the monsoon so that you can flush the river during the dry season. Because rivers don't flow, Ravi is not perennial, it's a seasonal, it flows when the glaciers melt in. तो बारिश का पानी आप स्टोर करें और फिर आप उसको डाल दें. मगर दोनों में मसला है. इरिगेशन वालों ने कहा कि जी देखें हम आपको साफ़ पानी देंगे और लाहौर से गुजर के जब आएगा तो वो गंदा पानी होगा, वो किसी का काम नहीं होगा, ठीक है जी. And you want to put up dozens of spate dams, 10,000 acres, 5,000 acres north of Lahore and Narowal and Sialkot, ठीक है. You'll lose elections because that's really rich rice growing territory. You'll be converting one for the other. So go ahead. There are problems. But suppose you find the water. The next thing is you have water, clean water coming into the city, flowing down the city, and we've got 14 places where Lahore discharges its untreated waste into the Ravi riverbed, right? So no one wants to live next to a sewer. So the next thing is if you get the water, you have to treat all 12 or 14 of these drains Lahore has. And each one they had proposed would need to have what's called an combined effluent treatment plant that can take whatever waste is coming at you and sort of clean it. they require a certain amount of technical skill to operate and a considerable amount of electricity. And they're also very expensive. And that's when the government said, look, this is too pricey. Anyway, the point is that the PTI government in Punjab, there was once again interest in this real estate development. And what we found out that the RUDA, Ravi Urban Development, had done is that instead of formulating its own vision for what the development should be like, it borrowed the feasibility that Meinhardt had prepared, blacklisted feasibility, and then applied it here. Now, the point is, the feasibility rests on ifs. If you get water, if you put up treatment plants, and if we have the capacity to run it. And that comes to a couple $2 billion, and you're only treating the water of Ravi at Lahore. And I have to understand that once the water of the Ravi flows past Lahore, the drains of Gujranwala, Sialkot and Faisalabad also discharge into the Ravi. So if you're putting $3 billion into treating Ravi at Lahore, you're not really fixing the problem now, are you? So the future looks like a cement nala with dirty water in it and lots of houses on both sides, unless RUDA is put to a stop.
Yeah, because they're still forcing farmers to, give up their lands. I've seen videos.
Well, land acquisition is the forcible taking of their lands, but there are certain preconditions to that. One of which was pointed out by the High Court, because the great irony here is that this land acquisition, this eminent domain, is constitutionally permissible in Pakistan. You can take someone else's land, provided it is for a public purpose and you give them compensation. So back in the day, ये अंग्रेज़ों का कानून है 1894 का, वो जब टेलीग्राफ लगा रहे थे या रेल लगा रहे थे या सड़क लगा रहे थे या हस्पताल बना रहे थे, if it was someone's land, they would say, look, public purpose, here's the market rate for your land. Now, fast forward a couple hundred years, fast forward 100 odd years, we have evolved that where to a point we have now, the Supreme Court of Pakistan accepts that the acquisition of land for residential housing is a public purpose, provided a specific category of people are benefiting from that housing. So if it's sort of widowed women or soldiers who have sacrificed their lives in the defense of this country, you can give them residential housing. It's a public purpose, and as long as you compensate the farmers for it at whatever market rate is, and you see, market rate doesn't mean when a project is announced on a piece of property, the values of that property increase. And our Land Acquisition Act is designed in a way that protects the government from having to pay the premium that occurs on account of the announcement of the project. The government will only pay the price the land was at before the project was announced, not the benefit. And what the High Court said is that, look, it didn't mind that the Supreme Court has said that you can have land acquisition for residential purposes provided it's a specific bunch of people. Fine. But under this principle, you could conceivably turn all of agricultural Punjab into a residential housing scheme in one flick of a switch. To which the High Court says, look, but there have to be larger questions of food security arising out of climate change. And that's why the existing provisions of the Land Acquisition Act don't seem to take this into account. And that's why I'd like the government to review this law. It's the first time a court sort of questioned the validity of the Land Acquisition Act, which is a pretty huge thing.
That is a huge step, yeah.
One form of adverse environment impact, which is what people should be either reducing or compensating for, is the acquisition of land. People think that it's just bad air quality. No, अगर किसी का दरख्त कटता है या 100 दरख्त कटते हैं, उसका माहौल ख़राब हो रहा है. उसकी ज़मीन अगर आप ले रहे हैं, उसका माहौल ख़राब हो रहा है. Which is why you cannot do a land acquisition. This is another thing the High Court said. You cannot do a land acquisition without first completing an environment impact assessment. So the Land Acquisition Act will try and figure out what the value of the land should be. The environment impact assessment process will try and find out what other compensations are due to people because of the environmental impact of the project as well. So that was another thing the High Court said as well. And the 208-page detailed decision of the Lahore judgment of the Lahore High Court was suspended by the Supreme Court of Pakistan merely days later on an appeal filed by RUDA and the government of Punjab. The Supreme Court, however, it suspended the judgment pending arguments on the appeal. This was on the 31st of January of this year. But it allowed RUDA to continue construction only on those properties that it had, at that point in time, on the 31st of January, paid for and possessed.
I have one last question because I feel like it's more on a personal level for me. So it's like we talked about urban sprawling, right? वो उसकी सारी हमने discussion की. So I want to pivot towards population density or population control because ये मैंने एक personal level पे face किया है चीज़. So like for instance, like I have 4 people living at my place. मेरे जो 5 मरले के घर में, मेरे जो 7 वाला घर है, उसके 3 floors हैं. ठीक है, और वो किराए पे ईच फ्लोर, ठीक है, वो किराए पे, तो इसका मतलब है कि देयर इज 15 to 16 पीपल, देयर इज 3 फैमिलीज लिविंग, राइट. तो वी टॉक्ड अबाउट अर्बन स्प्रॉलिंग की जब हमने बात की तो वी टॉक्ड अबाउट, तो अगर मैं पॉपुलेशन डेंसिटी की तरफ जाती हूँ विच मीन्स के रिसोर्सेज की हम बात करते हैं, जितना मैं पानी यूज़ कर रही हूँ, फिर मेरे साथ जो घर है वो जितना पानी यूज़ कर रही है, उनकी इंक्रीज रिसोर्सेज, उनकी इंक्रीज इलेक्ट्रिसिटी यूज़ होगी, देयर सो मेनी अदर थिंग्स दैट कम अंडर रिसोर्सेज. तो मतलब हाउ कैन वी allow people to understand something of this sort is very serious that needs to be considered. Or there was this, I connected it to this research I came across where there were these researchers who worked on के मॉडल टाउन का केस उन्होंने they took it and they basically talked about what is called रेन वाटर हार्वेस्टिंग. तो एक डोमेस्टिकेटेड मेथड है सप्लाई, पानी के सप्लाई को इंस्टिगेट करने के लिए, एंड दे टॉक कि ये एक ऑल्टरनेटिव मेथड हो सकता है पानी के मसले को, यू नो, टू वर्क अराउंड इट बिकॉज देयर इज अ लॉट ऑफ वाटर स्कार्सिटी एंड फ्यूचर में भी इसको देखा जा सकता है. सो व्हाट इज़ योर टेक ऑन दिस मेथड एंड व्हाट डू यू, हाउ डू यू थिंक के जो पॉपुलेशन डेंसिटी या पॉपुलेशन कंट्रोल का जो मसला है, how deeply interconnected it is to water scarcity?
It's interesting you mentioned Model Town. Model Town was probably launched about 100 years ago, 1922. Khem Chand, the lawyer, and it was the result of him reading up on the cooperatives and the cooperatives movement in Europe, and also the work of Patrick Geddes and John Jacob Holyoakes, who talked about the garden city concept. I mean, European cities were beset by pollution and other issues, and there were all these sort of attempts to try and rationalize how a city should work. And good old Khem Chand was thinking about this, and he introduced a model town cooperative society with the first flush toilets. These were the first English-style houses in Lahore. Up until then, Lahore Androon, and then as Lahore spread out in what used to be called Krishan Nagar, now called, unfortunately, Islampura, you see the same type of housing. It's mid-density, mid-rise. Most of the wall city, and so it's like 3 or 4 floors high. Usually mixed use, with the ground floor with having a couple of shops, and then the private apartments would be upstairs. Mostly inward-facing courtyards that also allowed for privacy and for hot air to rise and to draw in the cool air from the shaded streets outside, which is how culturally Indians have lived in cities for literally thousands of years. And then comes Khem Chand with this British model of an English country garden, where you can have a garden now, you can have flush toilets. But if you want a garden, it's going to get hot. If you want a garden with windows, it's going to get hot in the summer. This is before electricity. So in order to prevent that or to regulate temperatures, you have a big plot, you have a row of large trees around the plot, you have a big house with nice big verandas and sort of chhajjas with air vents and so on and so forth. You have 16-inch walls and 20-foot ceilings, and you can live a fairly comfortable summer in a model town home, but you need a 2-acre plot. Right? And so after Model Town, I don't think Lahore looked back. A lot of our housing is aspirational. We have developed a housing template now.
बिल्कुल इस तरह कंस्ट्रक्ट नहीं करते जिस तरह हमारी क्लाइमेट हमें अलाउ करता है.
And this is also a low density template. Someone did a study of the sort of population densities in Lahore, and they vary from like 800, 400 people per hectare in the walled city and North Lahore to about 20, 30 people per hectare in the sort of peri-urban area, residential housing schemes, not fully built up at this point. Now, we know that the population of Lahore may double in the next 50, 60 years. And if we were to accommodate that population in a low density template, someone once did a study and said we'd need something close to 2,000 square kilometers to do so. Given the fact that Lahore's sort of existing footprint's about 1,700, 1,800 square kilometers, we'd have to double the size of the city to accommodate a doubling population on a low density template. But if you were to adopt a 400 person per hectare density template, which is not, by the way, staggering. Manhattan in New York, much higher. Paris, by the way, about 6 to 800. And Paris is a regulated mid-rise, mid-density city. You can have very effective mid-rise, mid-density. You can double the population in no more than 300 square kilometers. Now, the difference between 2,000 and 300 square kilometers is that the 2,000 square kilometers will need to have roads stretched out. The money from the roads will come from the exchequer, from our taxes. Then the utilities, the water, the electricity, the gas pipelines will have to be stretched out and then consumed. And this is a very inefficient way of distributing those resources. And also then the inevitable, urban heat island, and then traffic and air pollution that follows from the fact that low density does not accommodate the traffic for public transport. There are not enough people at a bus stop for the public transport to be financially viable in a low density sprawl. But if you do mid-rise, mid-density, you can double the population in a fraction of the cost and have, walkable cities, no need for cars, better public transport. So yeah, density is a crucial ingredient in how you can plan this city. And to say, look, it's not just private housing, it's the density of private housing that's also very important as well. Because you can't just, someone's, I don't want to sound jealous or something, but I know plenty of people in the cantonment and DHA who have had relatives, some of whom have died 3 times for their country. So, God bless them a plot. But you can't keep on dishing out 4 canal plots for someone. Frankly, which war has Pakistan won? We can't dish out 4 canal plots to everyone who retires out of the armed forces.
Itni si jab resources reh gayi hain, it's not like infinite hamare paas resources, then we need to have
the other staggering fact, and this is from a 2012 study, so things have really changed. This was defense phase 5 was for shayad puri tarah bana bhi nahi tha. Ab to defense 10 tak pahunch gaye. Okay, in 2012-13, let me see if I can remember the statistic. 90% of the population of Lahore lived in 10% of its footprint. And that 10% of the density of Lahore lived in 90% of its footprint. If you go to Shadra, the 10 union councils that comprise Jahangir's tomb, there are about 1.5 million people who live there.
Yeah. How?
And somewhere in 2040, I would be surprised if the population of DHA is more than 1 million people. The whole phase 1 through 10
is more than
1 million people. I would be surprised. So the immense inequality in the distribution of land, which is a major scarce resource in a city, in favor of the propertied and automobile elite, is a grave injustice.
Well, I think on that note, first of all, thank you so much for joining us and for kind of giving us all this important information that we kind of just, it was very enlightening. But in the end, I would like to ask, shayad silly sawal hai, I don't know, but for people who do want to kind of, be a part of making a difference or trying to create awareness, like what are some of the avenues that young people or just Shahri or anyone watching this, I know it could be probably something little, but there is some, like we can still form collective action or be part of people already working on it.
It has to be collective action.
It has to be collective action. Individual level pe to I don't think wo baat bhi ab nikal chuki hai. It has to be collective and political action in a lot of ways. So how can we be a part of that collective and political action, and how can we create that political and collective action?
I'm a bit of a dinosaur. I'm the wrong person to ask, really. But I am always amazed and impressed and incredibly proud of what younger activists are doing. There are literally dozens of initiatives, homegrown, universities ke andar, you just have to Google search it, that match your interest. You don't like plastic pollution? There you go. You want to do water conservation? Do this. You want to talk about food justice and food security? There you go. You want to talk about urban planning or energy use, or the fact that women aren't properly represented in the water sector or not properly protected in public transport? All of these are areas and avenues that you can engage in. And if there isn't an existing platform, make your own, right? Make some noise. At COP, I had the pleasure of moderating a panel on youth activism and climate change in Pakistan.
I think I saw some clips of it. We had some Pakistani activists there as well.
That's right. And they got right under the nose of the special advisor to the Prime Minister on youth, which I was very surprised, because you are a politician meant to be dealing with the youth, or unke saath wo naraz ho gayi. I was very upset with her. I thought she misbehaved immensely and told her to her face at that point. But these 4 kids got under her nose so badly that she came back to Islamabad and had a Zoom session with them and is now talking about a youth advisory panel on climate change. So get under people's noses, get noticed, and get something done.
Exactly. Well, on that amazing note, thank you so much. Thank you for the people watching this. And we're going to put some resources in the description. And hopefully we can kind of, and yeah, anyone out there who wants to kind of engage and kind of, have something to say and you need a platform, I want to talk about this, reach out to us. We are very willing to kind of make that happen for people. So, and even, thank you so much. It was lovely talking to you.